Welcome to the Ephesiology Podcast, a podcast dedicated to the study of the early Christian movement and its implications for the church today. Today, we are joined by Michael, our resident ephesiologist, and I am Andrew Johnson, associate pastor at Neartown Church in Houston, Texas. Michael, it is the two of us today, and we are finally starting to tackle the long-promised, long-sought-after question and answer sessions that we have sought from our listeners. So we tried, we begged for people to submit some questions. We have received a number of those, and so today we launch into that. We attempt to answer. So, Michael, on a 1 to 10 scale, how scared are you of these questions, or how excited are you to deal with them?
Yeah, well, on the scale of 1 to 10, in terms of how fearful I am about the questions, I mean, they're formidable questions for sure. Some of them we might have anticipated, a couple of them not. So I think this could prove to be an interesting couple podcasts that we do.
And that is absolutely right. Michael is saying a couple podcasts because we'll try to tackle one or two thematically. So if you were a question asker and you don't hear us deal with your question, have no fear. We'll be talking about it shortly, we hope. And if we go through all of our questions and you think, I swore I asked a question, why didn't they answer? It's okay. Reach out to us. You can send an email to me, Andrew Johnson at neartownchurch.org. I will do all I can to surface it to the top and make sure that we talk about it. But today we are going to a listener who is in Spain. Am I correct in that? A listener from Spain?
Listener from Spain.
Okay. His question is around, first of all, he had a statement, so I'm going to turn it into a question. Should our pastors be missiologists? And then he goes on. So, Michael, we're gonna bracket that. We'll come back to it. He asks a question in regards to tribal theology and the educational systems around tribal theology and how missiology fits in them. I just tried to sandwich a whole bunch of that. Michael, did I do a decent job at least grabbing all of the disparate parts?
Oh yeah,
and smashing it together. Okay.
Yeah. And I mean, we don't want to skirt around the main. It seems like the main reason for his question surrounding Reformed traditions, and but I think as we're looking at this question, it applies not just simply to Reformed theology or the way in which Reformed adherents will do missions, but it really is around that tribal issue. How do our tribes do missions? And I think about this in terms of how do we do missions when we come from a particular theological background? And so what's the role of dogmatic theology, if you will? Those theologies that will, very clearly express themselves like Reformed theology, Wesleyan theology, and so forth. How do we go about doing missions when we have that kind of, theological bent to us?
Okay, so let's deal with the first bracketed question. They do tie in together, and I think appropriately so. Should pastors view their role as missiologists? Michael, our resident ephesiologist, missiologist, what do you think about just that thought? Should pastors view themselves as missiologists?
Yeah, That's such a great question, and that's not an easy one to answer, I don't think, because in one sense, I think all of us should view ourselves, especially if we're in full-time ministry, where our occupation is to think about ways in which we're engaging people, that we should be thinking of ourselves in a missiological manner. Whether that's specifically as a missiologist, I don't know. I would tend to say no, because a missiologist will be trained specifically in the area of missiology and have a broader understanding of the sociological and anthropological issues that we should be addressing as we are thinking about the theological engagement of people in different cultures. That might not be necessarily for everyone. But at the same time, I do think we need to think as missionaries when we're engaging people. And that might be the way in which I would ask the question: should a pastor be thinking as a missionary? And I would answer that question, yes. I think we all need to be thinking as a missionary. That doesn't mean that we're all missionaries, but we should be thinking as a missionary. And that, again, is going to the idea that we need to be conversant with ways in which we can effectively communicate the stories about Christ in a particular culture, and how those stories are going to impact that culture. And that's, in essence, I think, broadly speaking, what the task would be for us. And I like this too, because it goes back to what Paul tells the church in Ephesus in Ephesians 4:11, that Christ gave some as apostles, and we would think about the apostle as the role of a missionary, some as prophets or forth-tellers, preachers, if you will, some as evangelists, some as shepherds or pastors, and some as teachers. And together, that group prepares the church for works of ministry, prepares the saints for works of ministry. And in that sense, then all of us that are a part of the group of the saints, that the church, should be prepared to act as missionaries, preachers, evangelists, pastors, and teachers. That we should all have, at some level, skills in those areas if we are truly being equipped by those who are in the church with that, who are given that responsibility, if that makes sense.
It entirely makes sense. And I feel like I'm on an episode of Point Counterpoint, or whatever some of the argument type shows are. So I think I'm a bit more passionate towards the end of, and off mic, Michael and I have had this conversation and disagreed with each other. I do think we're all called to be missionaries, and I do think every Christian is. I think that's an identity type piece, because we have been sent. And so because of that, oh, dang it, Michael, I'm sad because I can't remember who said the original quote. But the idea is, every heart with Christ, a missionary; every heart without Christ, a mission field. I believe that we as Christians have all been sent out, and we bear that good news. And so where I see that question on, should all pastors be missiologists? If any of you have been listening to the podcast for a while, or are even engaging with Michael's book, Ephesiology, I mean, there is such a focus on getting in and focusing on the context that God has put you in, and that we all need to be asking those contextual questions. What is happening around me? Where is God already moving? Where do I see bits of the gospel story or connection points in which I can bring the good news of Jesus and help them see God is already at work. The person that you are looking for is here, and he is Jesus. All Christians are called to that. And so, based on at least what I'm saying about that missionary type focus, that drive that we all have within us, pastors who are playing their role in God's kingdom in leading and shepherding people towards that active work of bringing people into the good news of our faith, then we should be always asking those contextual questions. We should always be looking on what's going on around us in our communities and how we can encourage people. Hey, I see this over there. Go after that. I see this in the text. Don't you see this? Now, how can you see this in your life? So I think I'm a little bit more on the pro missiologist side for pastors, but I certainly don't mean it in a professional sense, like occupational rather. But that missionary view of always looking and seeking how to engage that culture and understand what's happening. So towards that end, I am leaning pro. You've been very kind to me and quiet. And what are your thoughts to some of the craziness that I'm spouting forth?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not unwarranted craziness, I would say. I think many people have said this, but I think more recently, J.D. Payne has made the comment that if we're all missionaries, then none of us are missionaries, or something to that effect. And I would tend to agree with that. That doesn't mean that we're not to be like missionaries, but if all of us are missionaries, then there's going to be a gap in the church. And that's why I think if APEST is our model, the apostle, prophet, evangelist, shepherd, teacher, that we read about in Ephesians 4, and if we understand apostle, of course, being one who is sent, and that role primarily is crossing borders, crossing cultures into places, then that really is the function of the missionary. Now, where I would agree is that as the apostle or the missionary in a church, he or she is to be equipping the church to be like missionaries, not to become other apostles or other missionaries, although that could certainly happen. But their call by Christ is to equip the entire body of Christ to function as missionaries, not to be missionaries, if I can make that distinction.
Right. Well, because it has to be a part of the I am a part of that bigger story of what's going on. Thinking along the lines of not just this is who I am, so this is what I do, but this is who I am, and now let me help you see how I see the world, so that you can think like I think when you show up in these places, so that you can engage others evangelistically, so that you can engage others in that. I'm trying to stay away from the word missional because I don't want to make all of my comments just fall under missional, and all of your comments fall under missiological, like we're opposed, because I think there's a lot of bleed over between the two. In how we're talking, but I appreciate the APEST focus again in getting this way.
Yeah, and I think where we would agree is that ultimately the call is for all of us to be disciple makers, no matter who we are, as we're gifted in the body of Christ. We are clearly called to be disciple makers. And so I think that's important for us to highlight. So I mean, I like the question here because it highlights the potential for dysfunction in the church if we will tend to, focus on specific areas of gifting and not or focus on specific areas of gifting at the expense of other areas. So I would be comfortable in saying, in light of Ephesians 4:11, that apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers are all to be disciple makers, just like everybody else. some of them are going to help the church by equipping them with skills and abilities to be missionaries. Others will help them to equip the church with skills and abilities to be preachers, or those who can really effectively bring the word of God to address a cultural issue, as is the role of the prophet, and similarly as an evangelist, shepherd, and teacher. And so all of those, functionally speaking, in the church are helping all of us have the skills and abilities to do work like a missionary, like a prophet, like an evangelist, like a shepherd, and like a teacher. Where there's an imbalance, and I think we see this even globally speaking, where the church in the West has focused much more attention on the shepherd role and the teacher role than on the apostle, the prophet role, to a lesser degree, the evangelist role.
Right. The abandoned apes.
Yeah. And what has happened is that the church, and by very nature of those who are leading the church, they're preparing from their gifting as shepherds and teachers more people who will be inclined to be shepherds and teachers. And those who have a sense of gifting as apostles, prophets, and evangelists are kind of left on the margins. And we see the opposite happening in the majority world church, and especially among church planting movements and disciple making movements, where the emphasis has been more on the apostolic, prophetic, evangelistic gifting. That's propelling the church forward, seeing more churches start, seeing evangelism done in more effective and perhaps even larger scale ways. But in the wake of those movements, you leave a church that hasn't been equipped with shepherds and teachers.
Which is why there's a lot thrown at church planting movements and disciple making movements about not standing strong on theology or having corruption come in, because those are I don't want to say the weaker gifts, just the not as seen or not as equipped gifts in those contexts.
Yeah, for sure. And the opposite is true in the context of the Western church, where those who are looking from the lens of a church planting movement or disciple making movement look at the Western church and say, well, it's weak because it's not starting more churches, it's not doing more evangelism, and so on. And so what really ideally needs to happen, and I think this is Jesus's intention, as Paul is outlining his gifting to the church, is that those 5 areas of gifting for the equipping of the saints for works of ministry have to be working in concert with each other. They can't be working in isolation from one another, and they should not be working in competition with each other. Rather, they should be working in concert with each other. And I think it's there then when you have apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, and teachers working together in concert, that's where you have an expression, a Christ-like expression of the church.
Well, I think in a funny way, the way the question was asked was a bit of a Trojan horse to get us into the topic of APEST, but only because, as asked, essentially our pastors, missiologists, we jump on it. We're really excited to talk about it, but are all pastors apostles? No. We just would have answered quickly. Are all pastors prophets? No. That gifting wise, they're intentionally apostles, prophets, evangelists, shepherds, teachers. We would have understood, or at least been able to say, okay, we're talking about one gift set. Not everybody should be everything. We're all going to have our roles, because, looking at that 1 Corinthians 12 passage, are all knees elbows? No, they are not, and they should not be. But it certainly is a room for all of us to grow, understanding where we are deficient and understanding how we absolutely have to lean on one another to be or to express the fullness of Christ as his body, as his bride in the world.
Yep.
Okay, so let me forcefully get into that second set of questions in regards to, again, contextually for this writer, asking about that Reformed evangelical tribal affiliation, how we go about both educating and engaging the world when sometimes we come from that very, I don't want to use the word rigid because I don't think that's fair, firm theological background, to move towards that. So, Michael, do you have any thoughts in regards to this? I'm laughing. Michael always has thoughts.
I have
Okay.
one thought. No, I don't know. I mean, this is such a great topic because it touches on a number of issues that we're confronting in missions around the world. And one of those is what is frequently referred to these days as neocolonialism. And neocolonialism can be expressed in many different ways. But one way in which it's being expressed today is Western missionaries going to another culture, bringing along with them their particular theological backgrounds, and in one way or another, imposing those theological systems on the cultures they're engaging. And they do this, I think, out of a real sincere belief that their particular theological system is the biblical system. And we see this, we see this among many traditions, not only Reformed traditions or Baptist traditions or other sorts of traditions, whether or not they have a theological, specific theological parentage or not. And I think there is some real potential danger in forcing or imposing a particular theological system on a culture that doesn't have the heritage, if you will, from where that theological system originally or emerged.
Yeah, originated. And I think part of the reason is every theological system is contextual, right? Like
and that doesn't sit well with people of particular theological systems. And I get that because all of us at some level want to believe that what it is that we believe, theologically speaking, however it's framed, if it's in Reformed theology or in Baptist theology or whatever theology it is, Arminian, Wesleyan, whatever.
dispensational.
Yeah, we want to believe that what we believe is in accordance with the historic tradition of the church. And so we will, when we do hold those kinds of dogmatic positions, if you will, it will set us at odds with those who come from different theological traditions. And to be honest, it causes confusion on the mission field when we bring those different systems to another culture that doesn't have the historic background by which to really evaluate those systems. And let me give you an example. I can remember as a young missionary in Romania, going into a context that was Baptistic in heritage, but not Southern Baptistic. And what I mean by that is that one of the distinguishing marks of difference between the two was the doctrine of salvation, where the Southern Baptist tradition would hold to the eternal security of the believer. But in the Baptist traditions in Europe, there was a belief that people could lose their salvation. And I can remember having very heated arguments with the believers there who believed differently than I did. I was eternal security, once saved, always saved. Get people to pray, and then the deal is sealed. And they were saying no. That I mean, that's not what we believe. We believe that people can backslide and lose their salvation. And so those kinds of conversations were wholly unproductive in the context of missions and the way in which we were trying to do things, ministry there. So yeah, we have to. I think we have to have, when we're talking about missions, we have to have a broader theological understanding that allows for those sorts of differences to be expressed without being contentious. Because ultimately, what it does, as I mentioned, is it causes confusion and will cause division in among believers.
Do
And
you
in
think? Well, okay, so I'm jumping in only to ask this question. As it was framed, asking why some of the biblical education, theological education, seminaries, whatnot, why they might shy away from teaching or talking about missiology in a prime importance. Is it? I don't mean to make this sound as ulterior as it sounds, but perhaps are some of those educational systems, do they not teach on missiology because it might upend some of the tradition in which they are coming from, right? Like you're teaching students to question the things that you're telling them not to question. Does that make sense?
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, that would be hard to say that that's the motivation behind why some seminaries aren't teaching missiology. I think for the most part, seminaries will incorporate some sort of missions into their programs, although it will tend to be a little ancillary rather than integral to their programs. There are other seminaries that are very noted for being much more missiologically minded in their programs. And I think, as I've reflected on this issue and as we've talked about even on the podcast before, I think where there is a danger is when we begin to silo these different aspects of theology and they become insular, and really ultimately ineffective in the way in which they can engage with contemporary cultural issues. And so I mean, I'm of course always an advocate for missiology to be a central part of theological education, not an ancillary part of that, especially because we're living in contexts today where cultures are crossing all the time, and there are increasingly more cultural issues that we're wrestling with, and without having a proper missiology and having people properly equipped to ask more missiological questions, then I think there's a real danger when we come to bring a particular theological dogma on a system without having really listened to the culture to understand, what the issue is, and then really reflect on how we can most effectively engage in that issue. I think we've been, particularly in the West, much more reactionary to cultural issues. And
No.
so, yeah, well, yeah, rather than being real good listeners to those cultural issues, we were much more inclined to think in terms of culture wars that are going on in society rather than thinking about how God is at work in society and how we might join with him in that work. So
I wonder how much of that too is even just our rational enlightenment based reasoning. that we feel that we have to have a certain and a secure answer to absolutely everything. Like what I mean to say is like perfectly lined out. There are no there are no edges, there are no questions. It's all black and white. And so when we get to these cultural touch points, then we feel, oh, we've got the answer now. We have dealt with this. Here is your answer. Moving on, and then continuing to make decisions based off of that one answer, and never ever circling back and saying, first of all, was the answer that we're basing everything off of accurate? And secondly, has the world changed? Right, the thing that we thought we dealt with and are moving on from, the world's changed. The cultures that we're interacting with are different. And so we need to slow down and not come at some of these things so rigidly, so confidently as to say we don't need to listen anymore because we've already answered that. But to just slow down and say, okay, actually we need to get back to the listening game. We need to get back to the understanding thing. And I think the pace at which things are changing should require us personally, but certainly our educational systems, to do more listening, to encourage and train more slowing down and asking better questions, which is a funny thing because you literally go to an educational system, college, university, seminary, to have questions answered. Right? Like I'm coming to you for answers. Why are we spending all this time talking about questions? But the reality is we've got to listen. Yes, we do need to have answers, and we as believers, we want to take them into God's word. We want to say, actually, there are answers. There are some things that we can know, but at the same time, be very clear what is a theologically tribal based answer. What is something that is more contextual to my time or my region, as opposed to true for all time, all people, everywhere. Just because, I mean, I was joking earlier when I said, dispensational theology would kind of fall into this category. But for somebody like myself, born in America, raised in America, the social milieu that I found myself in, we were all singing hymns about being caught up in the sky when Jesus comes back, and I'll fly away, and all of those things. And for me, that was normal, right? Like what I mean to say is, I thought that's what everybody has always believed. Right. You grow up and you sing songs about that. So why would anybody say anything different? And then to find out that that was actually a very recent, very American theology. And then I'm shocked at that point, because I was like, wait a second, this isn't all believers all time everywhere. In fact, it's very new and it's very American. That's shocking. But sometimes it's helpful to ask questions, to understand context, to learn culture, and then again, to, based on those questions through that missiological lens, seek Jesus, the Jesus of the Bible, not the Jesus of America or the Jesus of colonialism.
Yeah, good. I like that. As you were talking, it struck me that missiology is a theology that listens. And that might be a very easy, simple definition of missiology, because we want to listen, and it's important for us to listen, so that as we are listening, that we can reflect on how we respond to the issues that we're learning about. And that's what missiology does.
Well, Michael, I don't know if this horse is dead or beaten enough, but I think we've done what we can to answer the question from our listener in Spain. Thank you very much for engaging us with that question and allowing us this opportunity to back and forth on this very, very, very important topic of missiology and its role in all of our lives. Michael, any parting thoughts for this round of question and answer session?
Well, this has been fun. I'm thankful for the question and would love to hear from others as well. So feel free to write Andrew, and we'd love to engage more with your ideas.
Well, thank you very much to the listeners who have asked us questions. And I'll just say a thank you in advance to the other listeners who are now going to submit a question based on the fact that we're dropping this episode. We are very thankful for you as listeners. Please know, whether we say it frequently enough or not, we are blown away by the fact that you have given your time to engage with us, to listen and dialogue with us and do theology in community. We are very thankful for you. And we certainly want to invite the rest of you who occasionally listen and haven't jumped into dialogue, please do so. You can find us on Facebook. You can go to ephesiology.com, figure out, what blog or forum that you want to jump in. Or as Michael and I have been talking a lot about recently, you can go to masterclasses.ephesiology.com and see, is there something that I can step into and grow in my knowledge, education, and join with others as they also are doing theology and community. So for Michael, for myself, thank you for joining us on the Ephesiology Podcast today.